Normally, I wouldn't revisit a movie I've already reviewed, but since its director's cut is fast approaching, I thought I might as well look at the 2017 theatrical cut and see if all the hate surrounding it is justified, and see if my previous opinions still hold up nearly 4 years afterward. By the way, if you are interested in reading my original review from 2017, I will put a link to it in the description below. Before diving into my thoughts on Justice League's theatrical cut, however, I'd like to take the time to give some quick thoughts on the DC Extended Universe as a whole, up until then. Please be warned, throughout this video there will be massive spoilers for all the films mentioned, so I would recommend watching those first and then coming back here. However, for those ready to proceed forward, let's begin our journey to the Justice League. Man of Steel, while not a perfect starting point, managed to do its job effectively and show us a Superman that's just starting out and still a bit rough around the edges, leaving room for much more development in future installments. Whether he will receive said development is still up in the air. Honestly, I think Henry Cavill did a solid job portraying this iconic character and showed us a side we usually don't see. As for that controversial ending, I wasn't a fan of it and felt like it went against the character's morality both in the comics and in this film as well. I also wish we saw more of Clark's upbringing in Smallville and the development of his abilities throughout his childhood. The opening on Krypton also felt like it dragged on for far too long. Despite these flaws, this is easily my favorite entry in this cinematic universe. Its sequel, Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, is another story entirely. No pun intended. I saw both the theatrical and director's cuts of this film and had similar opinions regarding both. They are messy, depressing, dragged out cinematic slogs. The former more so than the latter, though. The director's cut managed to fill a few of the original's plot holes and improve character development, but as a side effect, the pacing was destroyed. My biggest gripe with this entry is the ending. I felt like the battle with Doomsday was totally forced, along with Doomsday as a whole for that matter. It came way too early in whatever story arc Zack Snyder was trying to set up. In my opinion, we should have been given more time to learn about this Superman instead of offing him as soon as he came. I think if we had another solo film or two with the character, then his death would have been more impactful. Matter of fact, I think rushing to the team-up story was a bad idea since these versions of the characters are still brand new to us. I wish we could skip this one since it was a convoluted mess with garbage pacing and an overly bleak tone. Thankfully, the next entry, Suicide Squad, we can definitely skip since it feels like a filler episode in this series, aside from introducing Harley Quinn and Joker, the only good aspects of this film. It was also faced with a load of production troubles, leading to a massive amount of vital footage being cut in response to Dawn of Justice's negative reception, such as various sequences developing Joker and Harley. It was because of this skeletal plot that it is definitely one of the weaker chapters in this universe, and bears very little impact on the overall arc. Wonder Woman was one I really enjoyed when I first watched it. It was certainly one of the more enjoyable movies in the DCEU, and gave us an excellent origin story for Diana while also setting up Justice League's events. On its own, it was also a great World War I period piece and explains what led the title character to live such a reclusive life in the present day, something its sequel unfortunately retconned. Again, this honestly should have come before Dawn of Justice, along with the Batman solo film and a possible Man of Steel sequel or two. Unfortunately, WB wanted to catch up to Marvel's cinematic universe and skip right to the epic crossovers, which unfortunately was the primary cause of the DC. The overall road to Justice League was filled with bumps and potholes, with plenty more even after the film was released. Due to its initial director Zack Snyder needing to step down because of a family issue, Avengers director Joss Whedon was brought in during post-production and completely revamped the film, reshot a majority of the footage, and changed a few plot elements from the former's initial version, which can be seen in the first trailers that were released in late 2016. This led to the first of Justice League's flaws, which was the inconsistent tone. Snyder and Whedon had two completely different visions for this movie, the former wanting it to be darker, more brooding, and more in line with the other two DCEU films he did, since he had plans for a full story arc. Whedon, however, basically wanted to make a DC version of the Avengers. He wanted it to be more colorful and lighthearted while still retaining the basic premise Snyder created, or at least the skeleton of it. As a result, much of what Snyder had originally filmed was left on the cutting room floor in favor of scenes that were heavier on humor and action, leaving only a small percentage of his original work in the theatrical cut. It's these two clashing visions that made the film feel like it didn't know what it wanted to be, and at times the humor felt out of place and in some instances out of character for those such as Batman.
Yeah. Oh, something is definitely bleeding.
When watching this, I felt like I was seeing two different movies competing with each other at the same time. In my opinion, WB should have delayed this film long enough for Whedon to completely revamp it, or until Snyder could return and achieve his version of the story. I will give this to the Whedon cut. It works in favor of characters such as Barry and Superman, giving us a version that is more palatable and accurate to the source material. In this version, the two characters retain their lighthearted, comical nature fans know them for, with the latter being more of a beacon of hope rather than dark and brooding like in Man of Steel and BVS. On the other hand, trying to add more humor to characters such as Batman and Victor felt extremely forced and out of place.
Something is definitely bleeding.
Even the latter's booyah at the end, while it was great fan service, felt forced and made me cringe a bit, which I know Ray Fisher himself would agree with. Speaking of Victor and Barry, I felt they were the two biggest victims of Whedon's direction, because among that lost Snyder footage was a significant amount of character development for both, including some cyborg scenes that could have really fleshed Victor out, no pun intended. I wish they could have still incorporated this into the final film somehow, since we know almost nothing about these two characters aside from a few lines scattered about. The same could be said for Aquaman as well, though to be fair, his solo film was already deep into production at the time, so I'll give his lack of development a pass, just this once. I wanted to know more about the accident that led to Victor's transformation and the lightning strike that gave Barry his speed powers. I'll also give a thumbs up to Danny Elfman's score, since it utilized a few remixed pieces of music from DC's history, including my personal favorite, the John Williams Superman theme. While I thank Whedon and WB for retaining the intended premise, I felt like the execution was botched beyond belief, complicating it even further than when Snyder was still in charge. They cut out quite a bit of footage that was probably vital to the story, leaving various plot holes throughout, and shoehorning in a Russian family that had little bearing on the story, an element that could have, and probably should have, been removed with little consequence. I bet if they allowed an extra half hour, 45 minutes of runtime, they could have made the narrative a bit more cohesive. The VFX shots also felt rushed and looked more like something out of a PS3, Xbox 360 game than one made for film. Again, this movie needed quite a bit more time to bake, especially in the effects department. You could tell the effect artists were under a severe time crunch, as some shots still looked rough around the edges, most notably Steppenwolf and Henry Cavill's digital shave job, if you catch my drift. Overall, the theatrical cut of Justice League isn't as bad as people say, but it is also not the best and could have been so much better if more time was taken to refine it into one consistent vision. The film itself is essentially a product of executive meddling, bad timing, and poor execution from both directors. The final result contained clashing tones, massive plot holes, and a severe lack of development for the new characters introduced in this film. I am hoping the Snyder Cut rectifies these flaws and gives us a product that will do his take on the DCEU justice. And yes, that pun was totally intended. Sue me. However, right off the bat, I will say that it does not need to be over 4 hours long, and I can imagine it would benefit from trimming some filler. But like I said, we'll get into that next time when I look at it properly. What did you think of Whedon's cut of Justice League? Let me know in the comments below, and please be sure to smash that like button, share around the globe, and subscribe for future content. Now, my AMM Squared Nation, the moment we have waited for is finally upon us. After 4 years of begging WB and Zack Snyder, we finally get to see what could have been and probably should have been.